Greetings and welcome back to Give the People What They Want. Once again, I'm joined by Prasanth and Roger, and we have a great list of stories for you guys today. Coming up on May Day, today's a big day of anniversary, so we'll get to all of that and more.
Give the people what they want.
Give the people what they want.
Give the people what they want. Your weekly movement news roundup.
Well, today is April 30th, and here in Give the People What They Want, we, of course, like to reflect on the past, lessons from the past, and how they shape our future. And today is an important historical anniversary. It is the Victory Day for Vietnam, a significant day in world history, a significant day, of course, the people of Vietnam, but again, the people of the world hugely impacted by this anniversary and everything that the war in Vietnam meant. So, it's interesting to look at, again, not only what was happening on the ground, but really in the solidarity movement. And so much of what happened in that time period, in the 60s and the 70s, internationally shaped the way people think about US imperialism, the way people think about US militarism, and its impact on the world. Of course, concurrently to the US's kind of invasion of Vietnam and the brutal war that was waged there, there were many other kind of incidents happening across the global South showing precisely this brutal and uncompromising desire to control and to ideologically control, of course, the peoples of the global South and their future. But again, a historic moment internationally, and many of what we remember of this period also is about the solidarity movement. And a lot of, in the US dominated cultural industry, we see a lot of what happened in the United States. And of course, this was fundamental and very important because of course, the draft and soldiers coming back from that, how they understood what the US is doing internationally. But this was not the only part of the solidarity movement in calling for an end to the war in Vietnam. We know that, countries across the global South, people were seeing what was happening in Vietnam and also mobilizing in solidarity. One of the examples of this, of course, was in India, where mass mobilizations against US imperialism and against US meddling in Vietnam took place. Wanted to do a little something different to start off the show today and ask Prasanth and then I'll ask Roger to talk about this moment in history and what legacy does that have today in India, and then we'll get to the UK.
Right, Zoe, like you said, I mean, the Vietnam, the movement for the freedom of Vietnam, the Vietnamese people's struggle is very fundamental to the Indian left. In fact, remains very fundamental to the Indian left. You will find slogans about Vietnam resounding through college campuses to this day, people finding inspiration in those struggles. And of course, like you said, the story kind of basically, tells itself. Here you have a small country, and there's the biggest military power in the world, and through sheer determination, through the power of organizing, through the power of an ideology, people were able to fight back this power. And of course, there's this classic example of how, I believe, when Robert McNamara, who was a top US official, was about to land in India, leftist students organized in large numbers and basically prevented him from landing at that point of time. They kind of blocked, that whole region. It happened in Calcutta, I believe. And that was just one example. And it, of course, like in many other parts of the world, it basically influenced. It was a formative experience for an entire generation of people, the entire generation of activists, of political workers who continue to be active today. And the lessons of solidarity and the fact that solidarity is such an important part of victory. And I think it's very important to also note that solidarity is not just, it is political. It is a political strategy. It is it is one of the fronts in achieving victory. I think that was very central. That was a key message from Vietnam, that people across India, people across South Asia and many parts of Asia are internalized, I believe. And that has continued to this day in the form of the anti-war movement, in the form of people's understanding of anti-imperialism, in the form of resistance to neocolonialism, in solidarity for Palestine. We'll be talking about that, but I believe a lot of that, those lessons of solidarity, in solidarity with Cuba, for instance, a lot of that was very heavily shaped by the Vietnamese people's struggle and what we learned from it.
All right, Roger, tell us about the UK and this movement.
Well, I think one of the things that that we can draw inspiration from is the fact that puppet regimes put in by the United States can be defeated. And I think actually many of the things that we're going to talk about today on this program really emphasize that, because many of these are struggles against puppet regimes put in place by the United States, or the interference that the United States and its allies are still trying to exercise. From our side of the equation, though, I think the fact that we are able to win is the biggest message, because I think the thing that we continually get told is that there's no point in doing stuff, there's no point in engaging in struggle, there's no point in all this solidarity and marching and all of that business, because you will lose. What Vietnam reminds us of, and so many other struggles that have come after that, is that we can win. And I think that's the biggest thing that we can draw inspiration from. This is not just a case of just looking back and, kind of dwelling in a moment in history, an important moment in history. This is about what we can do to take that energy, take that solidarity, take that enthusiasm for a real change in the world. How can we take that forward? And that's what history teaches us, is that if you struggle, you can win. If you don't struggle, you will always lose. And I think that's what we get from Vietnam. So solidarity to the revolution in Vietnam.
Great. And I think those are important lessons and important reminders to keep front of mind when we're discussing the next topic, which is Palestine. Again, a very long liberation struggle with huge losses, but significant gains in terms of international support, international awareness of this liberation struggle. So Prasanth, what's the latest in Palestine?
Right, Zoe. I mean, right now we're looking at one of those, I think, moments, so to speak, which is both extremely puzzling, but also extremely important. That is the International Court of Justice hearings that are taking place regarding what are supposedly Israel's obligations. I mean, this is a commonsensical thing. We'll come back to that. But the context for this hearing, of course, is that the United Nations had asked for the ICJ's opinion on what Israel's humanitarian obligations are to the people of Gaza after it launched its genocidal assault. Now, this, it's a bit surreal, and I'm not denying its importance. It is a very important hearing because, of course, the ICJ's opinion, which it will deliver in some time, it's non-binding. That's unfortunate. Will set the stage for further legal action. It will be used as reference, etc., etc. At the same time, it is a bit surreal in some ways, because right now it is going to be 2 months since the horrible blockade on Gaza began, the humanitarian blockade. And now this is the longest blockade that has taken place since Israel's assault began in October 2023. And as far as the latest numbers are concerned, I believe we have, 116,000 tons of food, which are currently waiting at the borders. They are not being allowed, 116,000 tons of food not being allowed to enter. And this is from the World Food Program. And they are not being allowed to enter because of this Israeli blockade. There are apparently 3,000 trucks of relief material from the UNRWA also not being allowed to enter. And what the World Food Program said just last week is that it has run out of supplies to give to the hot meals kitchens. And now we need to kind of understand the logistics over here, because the World Food Program was providing supplies to its own. It was running its own bakeries by the end of March. That's about 1 week. That's 1 month ago. 1 month after the blockade started, those bakeries shut down. Then we have after there have been only hot meals kitchens which have been surviving. Now each of these hot meals kitchens have been shutting down. I think 16 shut down recently, because again they're out of supplies. And now the World Food Program has basically run out of supplies to even supply, to give to these hot meals kitchens, right? And what we're looking at is thousands of people struggling with food. Again, the problem, of course, is that, in some senses, it's even difficult to keep track, because every week you get such horrifying reports. The latest report saying that since January, 10,000 cases of acute malnutrition have been reported. So many children, facing that. Of course, aid agencies warning that famine is likely to take place in some parts. And in the middle of this, you have these hearings, which are basically, asking what Israel's, are they trying to get an opinion on what Israel's humanitarian obligations are. And you have the United States, the US representative just spoke a few hours ago. And it is unbelievable, because if you read through what the UN representative spoke about, it is an exercise in extreme hair splitting to basically say that Israel, their argument is the UNRWA, which is an internationally recognized body which has been working for decades, but which Israel has been leveling allegations against, is not a reliable agency. And they have gone to extreme ends to say that Israel is technically not obligated to work with the UNRWA, although all reports say that the UNRWA is the best equipped agency to provide this kind of aid, right? So they have indulged in that level of hair splitting to make the point that, Israel does not have to actually comply in these circumstances in providing aid. And while it's horrible to think of the fact that while the UN representative was arguing how many families were starving, how many more people are facing malnutrition during that time period. So many families right now, according to reports, surviving on just 1 meal a day, maybe even less. And that is the situation we're in right now. The death toll, of course, horrific. The injuries, horrific. But also the attack on the health system, again, horrific. But also this crisis of hunger that is devastating the entire territory. And the entire global community gathering. A lot of countries making very important statements. Brazil, Colombia, Bolivia, all of them spoke over the past 2 days at the ICJ. South Africa, equally. All of them making a very strong case, calling for Israel, to follow its obligations. But nonetheless, the fact that right now we have this extremely unfortunate situation with the United States continuing to back Israel to the hilt.
Yeah, really devastating situation. With with Israel, on the other hand, also undermining any attempt to advance on ceasefire negotiations. In Ukraine, we spoke about it last week, but there have been significant advances in terms of peace talks. Roger, what's the latest?
Yeah, there's peace talks are clearly continuing to take place. What I think is really significant at the moment, there's a couple of things that are really significant. One is that Russia has called a ceasefire around Victory Day, which is, so that's the second ceasefire that we've had in a really short space of time. So I think that's good. It's always good that people aren't being killed, for sure. How far that will go towards anything more permanent is still up for grabs, but the discussions are still continuing. What I think is really dangerous about this moment in time is that there are no indications whatsoever from Ukraine that they're really interested in a ceasefire. And that just today, there's news has broken that the Ukrainians are set to sign a deal for these rare earth minerals. But of course, part of that whole process from the Ukrainian side is really about trying to continue the war. That's why they want that. That's why they're prepared to sign that agreement, because they want the United States to continue to provide the weapons to continue the fighting. So that's all kind of really kind of mixed messages, really, if you like, where on the one hand we're hearing talk about ceasefires and people wanting to move towards, but I suppose the one consistent thing is that Zelensky is really, really clear that he wants to continue the fighting. Trump, I think, said last week that is alleged to have told Zelensky that that Ukraine is going to lose Crimea. Fact of the matter is, Russia has Crimea. they are not going to give it up. And it's as simple as that. So, we can do all this dancing around about what all this stuff really means, but the facts are on the battleground, and Russia is really clear that what they have isn't going to be given away, but they also need some securities about a zone where the Ukrainians are not going to be able to attack Russia. I mean, the officials in Russia today are talking about the uptick in the number of attacks that are being made by Ukraine on civilians along the what they call the front line of the special military operation. So talks are clearly taking place. Witkoff is in, or has been in the last few days, in Moscow for those talks, and he's saying how the talks that he has had with President Putin have been serious, and none of those talks have lasted less than 3 hours, and that all sounds really good. My worry is that the problem is on the Ukrainian side, and that they show no indication whatsoever that they want to move towards a peace situation. So the role we were talking earlier on, Zoe, about the need where we are in terms of the peace movement and so on. Well, the peace movement really needs to keep the pressure on. We need to keep marching. We need to keep protesting as we continue to do over Palestine and so on. We must continue to do that because the pressure must come, I think, from the people to make sure that these talks are serious and that the fighting actually ends.
Definitely, and we've said it many times on this program, but ending this war is as important as ending all wars, because already there's been too many lives lost. Well, we're going to shift tone slightly away from war and towards struggle and resistance, as we were talking about in the beginning of the show. This past weekend was April 27th, the anniversary of the first democratic elections in South Africa after the fall of apartheid. This day has been rebranded. Prasanth, tell us about UnFreedom Day and this commemoration of whatever it is.
Right. So it's actually quite a unique day, so to speak. Although it's celebrated, it was marked, or it's not a celebration per se. It was marked over a couple, 2 or 3 days. Like you said, Freedom Day, April 27th, marks the first elections after apartheid, after the horrible atrocities of apartheid, after the horrible discrimination. It was seen as a dawn of a new hope, a moment for a new nation to take its place in the world and maybe create an alternative at a very difficult time. The 90s were really not a good time for all of us. But that promise was betrayed, and that is what UnFreedom Day marks. And UnFreedom Day is an initiative by Abhalali Basemajundolo, the South African shack dwellers movement, one of the unique social movements in the world, actually, which is celebrating, incidentally, its 20th year. It was founded in 2005. And the very next year, in 2006, it began marking UnFreedom Day as a day of mourning. Now, why do they do that? And I think it's important to note that they've marked it since 2006, which means very early on, they had a very clear analysis of what the post-apartheid political system was doing to the people of South Africa, which is that while the African National Congress was in power, what was happening was there was an intense rise in inequality, a very small elite benefiting from democracy. And this led the movement to basically ask this question, that what is freedom? Is merely the right to vote freedom? Is merely freedom for elites freedom? And you'll find a lot of these reflections in an excellent interview. It's on People's Dispatch. The Pan-Africanism Today Secretariat has done it with Sibu Sikode, who is the president of Abhalali. And that, the questions he asks are very relevant at a time when, one, South Africa is one of the countries with the highest inequality in the world. And two, it is at a decisive moment right now, which is that the ANC suffering setbacks in the last election is aligned with the opposition Democratic Alliance to form what is probably an even more right-wing government. And at this point, the people the movements like Abhalali have to really raise this question. I think also important to remind our viewers, on this show, we've talked about this movement very often, But very important to remind our viewers what this movement does, which is that it mobilizes homeless people to take over, unused land, to build shacks over there, to build means of livelihood. They conduct political education schools. They conduct regular schools. They seek to bring, so basically the questions of land, livelihood, dignity, all of these are very essential for Abha Halali. And what they're doing is organizing people to actually seize land, livelihood, dignity, all kinds of rights. And for that, they have faced a lot of persecution, because we talked about, again, on the show before, the fact that governments are fine as long as they're dispensing some of these aspects as, a favor, as a sop, as a means of patronage to people. But when the poor stand up and seize these rights, seize what is rightfully theirs, they can't take it. So Abha Halali workers and leaders have been attacked, they've been jailed, many of them have been killed as well. So it's a movement which is really unique in the global south, fighting for very important rights today, and which is why I think UnFreedom Day is one of those milestones which really deserves to be watched and understood across the world. Also very important to note that this movement is highlighted this year's UnFreedom Day, also highlighting the fact that there is no freedom until there is freedom in Palestine, until the violence against the people of the Congo ceases, and hence connecting the struggles that they face in South Africa with the struggles of working people, with the struggles of the oppressed across the world. So very important. I urge you to read both an excellent article on People's Dispatch on that and the interview, watch the interview with Sibu on that.
Great. Well, another part of the African continent, which we keep coming back to, the Sahel. Roger, what's the latest? We know there was an attempted coup that was dismantled. Tell us what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, in response to what appears to be a coup with Western powers behind it, I mean, thousands and thousands of people have taken to the streets across Burkina Faso today, and part of that is because of what was a really, kind of closely organized attempt not just to kill President Traore, but to destroy everything, including the hopes of the people. Very, very young country, really, as the continent as a whole is, but attempts to destroy hope, an attempt to destroy the belief, as we were talking about earlier on in this show, that the people can actually win. So this, the military takeovers that took place across the Sahel regions, by the West, they're often labeled as being coups and being, kind of horrible military dictatorships that have taken over. And I think we have to look at that in a wholly different way to the way that it's being portrayed. I think there's a real belief across the Sahel region, and as we've just heard about South Africa and elsewhere across the African continent, that now is a time for real and fundamental change, where Africans take over and benefit from the resources that they own, because for far too long, going way, way back, these resources have just been extracted and taken over by the Western countries. I mean, in this case, we're talking primarily about France and the role that they've played, but also, of course, the United States is heavily, heavily involved in all of this. So what is being said across the Sahel region is that we're not prepared to have that anymore, and we're prepared to do something different, and we're prepared to have our own destiny under our own control. I think it would be a mistake of the highest order to see this just as being an attack on President Traore. It is not. This is an attack on all Africans who believe that they have the right to be able to have their own sovereignty, they have their right to be able to grow as nations, and the right to be able to have some development in their countries as well. So this is, if you like, a real attempt by the West to put these countries under, as we say in Britain, under real manners. Now, part of what what we're seeing is a typically kind of traditional approach by the Western nations. So they don't often do this stuff themselves. What they do is they get client nations to step in and do this on their behalf. The evidence that Burkina Faso and the other Sahel nations are saying is that they have is that the Ivory Coast is involved in this and acting as a client for France. That is really dangerous. It's straight from the old playbook of the French. We have to keep exposing that. We have to keep saying, we know what you're doing, we see you, and we are prepared to show our solidarity to those people in these nations. So Burkina Faso today, could be Niger tomorrow, could be Mali the day after. Any of these countries who are prepared to stand up, we have to be able to show that we are with you, you have our solidarity, and we are prepared to march and support you in whatever way that we can. Now, of course, what's happening in the Sahel is they're not just sitting around and waiting for the next kind of coup to take place or attempted coup to take place. They're making plans to develop and build the future for the people in those regions. And remember, these are regions, these are countries that have been devastated, who are, in kind of Western terms, really poor in terms of money, but actually they've got all of these resources in the ground that are just used to benefit the rich nations of the north. But what one of the news items today that I think is really important is the way that the Sahel, the Alliance of Sahel Nations, has reached an agreement with Morocco to have a route to the coast. And that is really important. These are landlocked nations who are able to reach the coast. Now, I think this is massively significant in terms of being able to have to develop the trade and to build the wealth of these countries. So it's all right being able to have the benefit of the resources that you're able to get out the ground and say that they're going to be for the people inside those countries, but they also need to be able to trade with other countries as well. So having a route to the sea, I think, is really important. So what I would say in conclusion, I think that we have to show our massive solidarity to the people who've come out and said that they support President Traore and they support what the authorities in Burkina Faso are trying to do, and that we will point out these people who are trying to go back to the old ways of French domination of these countries, but also those countries that continue to act as client states for France and the other Western countries as well. And we need to show our full backing to the Alliance of Sahel Nations.
Well, it's definitely a historic moment, and the swelling of people's support, of popular support in this moment has been remarkable. We also know that today there were mobilizations in Accra, Ghana, also standing in solidarity with the people of the Sahel, the people of Burkina Faso against this coup attempt. Powerful images you're seeing right there. You'll see them later on People's Dispatch as well. And, finally, to conclude today's episode, again, we said it was chock full of a lot of different items, as always. But tomorrow is May 1st, International Workers' Day. And it is shaping up to be a day that will kind of break with this current mood of perhaps growing kind of despair as we see the Donald Trump administration kind of wreaking havoc, not only in the United States, but across the world. A moment where we've seen kind of the growth of the far right, setbacks in rights and rights that had been conquered, labor rights, rights of women, rights of the LGBTQ community. We're seeing, a series of setbacks across the world. But at the same time, as we just spoke about, there's also a lot of reason to be hopeful and a lot of reason to fight even harder. That's why so many people are taking to the streets tomorrow on May Day to affirm that despite, all of these setbacks, it's better to fight. It's better to be united than not. And so, importantly, actually, in the middle of this program, just as a note of hope, one of the Palestinian students who was arrested in the past couple of weeks in the United States in one of these immigration raids was just released. So I think that going into May Day with this sense of united we fight and united we win, I think is what we're seeing across the world. Trade unions are saying, okay, perhaps we've been quiet. This is the day to really go out and all force onto the streets. It's going to be an exciting day across the world. Again, we know there's mobilizations in cities. Hundreds of cities across the world will be doing surely a roundup from People's Dispatch. Stay tuned. Again, it's a historic date of struggle, and people are bringing this enthusiasm and this urgency of the current moment into this date. So we'll definitely be able to see some inspiring images from that. Again, affirming, going back to the lessons that we spoke about at the beginning of the show with Vietnam, that it is actually possible to win. And even when the deck is stacked against us, even when there's billionaires that are now essentially given free rein to decide about how the economy and how the budget should go, that people are resisting. So hopefully, leaving with that note of inspiration and hope, we can go into the rest of the week. Again, this was Give the People What They Want, brought to you by People's Dispatch, with Prasanth, an Indian journalist, Roger McKenzie, international editor of Morningstar News. Follow Morningstar, follow People's Dispatch. We are trying to bring you the news, not only of people's movements, but analysis from an anti-imperialist perspective. Follow us. Continue watching the show. Subscribe. It's on Spotify every week as a podcast. And thanks so